What's up, yo? Welcome to Your One Life. I'm your host, Kim Young Kim, and we're about to get into some really important stuff. But first, I want you to know what this podcast is all about. This podcast is all about helping you to learn from the greatest minds in the world, improving all aspects of your life, and unleashing your inner beast with performance-enhancing drugs. Get ahead with PEDS. Today's sponsor, by the way, is the PEDS dispenser. Once you pop, you can't stop the cops from making comments on your guns. Let's go. By the way, pets are for everyone. Women can have sweet looking guns too. Let's go. All right. Now, if you have not turned this off yet, it's time to get real and do a deep dive on happiness, right? Because today's episode is about the documentary Happy, which you can stream on Tubi for free with commercials, or you can rent it for a few bucks. But regardless how you watch it, you should definitely check it out. It's very unknown and very underrated for documentaries that make an impact on people's lives. And the documentary is all about happiness. And we can all use a little more happiness. We could all use a little more joy in our life. And it really breaks down what actually causes our happiness and what adds happiness to our life. And believe it or not, the United States is not even in the top 10 countries of happiness as we speak. Now, with that being said, the movie starts off with an Indian rickshaw driver. The narrator of the movie says, believe it or not, this Indian rickshaw driver is about as equally happy as the average American person. And that is absolutely crazy considering the fact that this guy talks about the hardships that he faces in his work, his living conditions, and also just all the things that he has to go through living in poverty in India. And side note, here's the deal. If your name is Rick Shaw, you just definitely have to be pulling the ladies, right? That's just a rule of having that name. Is that correct or no? Otherwise, you go by Richard, right? Somewhere in America, there's a guy named Rickshaw who started a business called Rickshaws. If you're listening, Rickshaw, please be a sponsor for the next episode. All right, let's get back on track. So as the documentary goes on, they start to talk about what actually determines our happiness. And one of the things they say is genetics. And that makes total sense because genetics influences pretty much everything in our lives. But one thing that was surprising is they said only 10% of your circumstances determines your happiness. And your circumstances include your income, your social status, where you live, and your age. And that was super surprising to hear. I honestly thought it'd be a lot higher. But they said 40% of your happiness depends on you, on your intentional behavior. 40% is a lot. Imagine if you had that kind of control over your weight gain or your weight loss or your height. Man, I would be one tall mofo one day and a short one the next, just to mess with people's heads. But in all seriousness, 40% is a lot. And what we do with our intentional behavior determines so much of our happiness. And that is such a promising thing to know. Now, there's this whole field of study called positive psychology that is referenced in the documentary. You should learn more about it. I've delved my foot into it a bit, and what I do know about it is it's freaking awesome. Now, in the movie, they talk a lot about dopamine. Dopamine is the chemical in your brain that causes you to feel good. And they say that the synapses the dopamine travels through start to die off from your teenage years on. And it's really one of those things that you really got to use it or lose it. And so what you got to do is you got to seek experiences that release dopamine, like popping bubble wrap. Once I pop, I can't stop the cops from saying, hey, why are you doing that, dude? That's annoying. Yeah, but anyways, so how does dopamine get released? Well, one of the easiest ways and best ways to get dopamine is cardiovascular exercise, moving your body. But not just doing cardio, but doing it in novel ways, because variety is the spice of life, as we all know. And when you switch things up, it releases more dopamine into your brain. One of the really fun parts of the documentary is when they have a bunch of people on a gorilla run and they're just running a race and they're all dressed up like gorillas. Speaking of which, if I ever have a prison break, I want the people helping me break out to have a gorilla costume, a headband, and a number waiting for me outside of the prison. That way I can just pretend I got off track from a gorilla run and I just need some directions on how to get to freedom. I mean back to the race. Yeah. Now, speaking of being outside, one of the people interviewed in the documentary is this surfer guy who's living his dream life, surfing every day in Costa Rica and enjoying his life. And he said two things that really stuck out to me. Number one, he said, nature is good medicine. And that's true. Nature is good medicine. We are all biophiliacs and we all love nature. We are wired that way and we need to spend more time in nature to be happy. The other thing he said was he told his kids when they became adults, try to work so that you can live your life in tranquility. And that's a great quote and that's a great thing to live by. Work so that you can live your life in tranquility. The next part of the documentary talked about flow state. And flow state is a state where you're in the zone. You're having fun. You never want it to end. You forget about your problems. And you really forget about yourself and your ego. And flow state can happen doing a lot of different things. It can happen when you're rock climbing, when you're surfing, when you're singing, when you're playing an instrument. It can happen pretty much anywhere. I myself achieve flow state when I'm writing Chuck Norris jokes. I mean, making Chuck Norris observations on factual evidence. But in all seriousness, flow state can happen anytime, anywhere. There was a guy in the documentary who was a cook at Waffle House, and he was like, man, I love this stuff. I've always loved it. And he achieved flow state by cooking food. And you can actually find flow state in your job. Ideally, that's where you want to be because flow state is super important. I could do a whole episode on flow state, and I will at some point. But the one thing to know about flow state is the people who achieve flow state more are the people who are happier in life. And that makes total sense, right? One thing that was super surprising was that income doesn't make that much of a difference on your happiness. Once your basic needs are met, making more money makes a small impact on your happiness. The difference between making $60,000 and $60 million actually makes very little difference in people's life. Now, Jim Carrey has this one quote that I love that goes, I think everybody should get rich and famous and do everything they ever dreamed of so they can see that it's not the answer. And that actually rings true because the people who are the bodyguards and the assistants of all these rich and famous and uber wealthy people oftentimes remark about how miserable these people actually are. One of the things that they reference in the documentary is the hedonic treadmill. And the hedonic treadmill is basically the enemy of happiness. Basically what it is the more money you make, the more you upgrade your life, and you're always doing more with the more that you get, and you're just keeping up with the Joneses, and it doesn't make you happier. One time I was on the set of the Kardashians as an extra, and as they were spending their money, I took it upon myself to say to one of them, treat yourself? You mean mistreat yourself. Am I right? Now that's a joke, but actually that is on my bucket list. Hopefully one day I'll get a chance to talk some sense into them. Now, as they say, money doesn't make a big difference in your happiness. I will say that having money in the bank in case of emergency and knowing that you'll be taken care of if something goes wrong does make you feel happier in the sense that you worry less and you know you have a safety net there for you if you need it. So there's nothing wrong with having fat stacks in the bank. It's just your income doesn't make that big of a difference in your happiness. But a running theme that I saw in the documentary was this whole idea of a safety net. And not really a safety net of money, but a safety net of people being there to catch you when you fall. People having your back and this whole idea of community, which I'll touch on more later. But that is a thing that makes people happy. Because think about it, no matter how old you are, no matter how wealthy you are, no matter your situation, we all want to know that there will be people who will be there for us when we need them. People who have our back. So what actually does make people happy? There's two different things, extrinsic goals and intrinsic goals. So what are extrinsic goals? Yo, come through in a role. I got extrinsic goals. I got things on my mind, like my freaking image. I come through when I win it, only when the people are looking at me and they think of me as good. I'm worried about my perception to them, and that's what I do. Yo, I just send a whole bunch of things up to my mind. I'm talking about my status when I'm climbing up these ladders. I'm talking about me looking just good up in the neighborhood with the people now. I'm talking about how I could stack cheese and basically I could see money in my bank. I'm talking about income when I just get some. That's what I'm saying. I want to make it grow. I'm talking about intrinsic goals all the time, and that's what I do when I flow, when I find I need relationships. I need to just grow. I need to understand how to just know how to help myself by helping others, and that's what I say when I come through discover things that are good up in my life, make me happier, and that's what I like. Come off the top, and that's how I go. Extrinsic, intrinsic, up in the flow. All right, so that's extrinsic and intrinsic goals. So, extrinsic goals are the things that I said in the beginning of the rap, which is your image, your status, and money. And these are the things that don't make you happy, but the things that do make you happy are relationships, having a feeling of community, experiencing personal growth, and the desire to help people. These are the things that make you happy, and intrinsic goals and extrinsic goals are in opposition to each other. Now, it's interesting that they go through a number of different countries, Japan being the least happy of all the industrialized nations at the time of the documentary, Bhutan, where they focus on gross national happiness, and the Netherlands, which is ranked as the happiest country in the world when the documentary was made. And it was interesting to see the juxtaposition between Japan, where people are just working themselves to death, literally working themselves to death, and also the Netherlands, where not only do they have free education through college and free healthcare, again, we're talking about safety nets, but beyond the safety nets that are created by the government, the people themselves create safety nets by the way they live, oftentimes in large communities. And in those communities, they have elders, they have kids, they have multi-generations of just people, and they cook together, they hang out together, they do life together. And it's just really cool to just see everybody just looking out for each other. And that's really what it's all about, right? Having people in your life that are looking out for you, that you can do life with, having a strong sense of community, having a feeling that you're not alone in this world, having people to do life with, that is what makes our lives meaningful. And the people in the Netherlands have figured this out very well. Side note, I need more old people in my life. I think I'm going to start a game show called Who Wants to Become an Adoptive Grandparent, where I'm the prize. All right, so back to it. Another group of people who have figured this out are the people in Okinawa, Japan. It's crazy to see the stark contrast between the people who live in the major cities in Japan and the people who live in Okinawa, because they live so very differently. The people in Okinawa are a lot like the people in the Netherlands. They're building community across generations. The elders in Okinawa live in deep community with each other. They have deep friendships where they hang out, they dance, they do karaoke, so on and so forth. But they also have intergenerational relationships with people who are in their 20s and 30s, and also relationships with the kids. Now, this didn't make it into the documentary, but there's this one part in the documentary where a bunch of kids are having this race, and they're all just like 2-year-olds running, big smiles on their faces. And off camera, the director goes up to one of the elderly women who's out there watching the kids run. And he goes up to her and he goes, "Hey, which one of these babies is one of your grandbabies?" And she's like, "None of them." And he's like, oh, well, why are you out here? And she's just bewildered. She's like, I'm out here because I'm here to support all the babies. Like, this is a community. This is what we do. And it's just this beautiful story I heard about this documentary, which really shows, first off, the beauty of community, but also the fact that we can all show up for each other, regardless of bloodlines, regardless of any familial status. And if we do, that will actually make us happier. So shout out to the people in Okinawa for doing community right. And because of this, because they go out there and enjoy themselves amongst each other, and they work in the fields and they grow their own vegetables and they focus on their happiness. Because of all this, they are one of the 5 blue zones in the world, which means they have the most 100-year-olds living in their area. And the cool thing about living to be 100 is think about how little you will care about what people think about you when you are 100 years old. That is a freedom I want to experience. Now, the reason why the people in the Netherlands, the reason why the people in Okinawa have so much happiness is because they practice social bonding and cooperation. And these 2 things have been revealed in the documentary to release dopamine. And that makes sense because how will we become a society without things like cooperation and social bonding? We've evolved to survive, and that's definitely a part of it. And that is also the reason why I move to a new apartment every few months. I'm trying to create social bonding and cooperation between my friends as we're hauling large furniture up and down stairs. This is my goal, not because I'm being evicted from these places. And speaking of helping people, the act of helping people actually helps you to become happier and also feel like you're part of this bigger thing, which is something that we all need a little more of in our lives. Because think about this. I know that a lot of people are very cynical of professional athletes and whatnot, but why do those professional athletes oftentimes go out of their way to make their fans' day? They do this because it actually feeds their soul to go and make a difference in someone's life. I know when I can make someone smile, when I can make someone laugh, when I can make someone's day a little better, it helps me with whatever I'm going through in my life. One time, I was having a terrible day. Terrible day. And my roommate at the time looked at me in my funk, in my depression, and he was like, yo, why don't you go down to Chipotle? You love going down there, cracking jokes with those folks. You love putting a smile on their faces as you get your burrito bowl. So why don't you go and do that to get yourself out of this funk? And I was pretty desperate at the moment, so I was like, okay, sure, whatever is going to help me get out of this terrible mood. So I went down there, started cracking jokes, started rapping for the folks that worked there, and it made my day so much better. It really did. It just put a smile on my face knowing that I could impact other people's lives. And I genuinely believe that a lot of these athletes do it because it feeds their soul to know that they're making a positive impact on people's lives. And it also, of course, makes them happier. Go and do some things for other folks so you will build up your happiness. You can do so many things for the people, and you will know what it feels to be the person that makes a difference up in someone's life. And that is just the way you got to live right now. So go and give, and then you will receive the things that you are seeking in this thing called happiness. That is the way to go. That is the way to go for real, though. Help others. It will build up your happiness. And that's ultimately what we all want. And watching this movie makes me think of an Eleanor Roosevelt quote that goes, happiness is not a goal, it's a byproduct of a life well lived. And that's true. If you live a good life, you will have happiness. All right, so I took a bunch of notes throughout the documentary. Here are the notes that I have from the end of the documentary when they wrap it all up. Cultivate compassion and altruism. Authentically be yourself. Happiness is a skill and you can get better at it. Ooh, that's a good one. That gives me hope for all of us. Do things you love, play, have new experiences, spend time with your friends and your family, practice gratitude, do things that matter. Also, don't forget to focus on these 3 important aspects of happiness: experiencing personal growth, particularly doing things that put you in flow state, developing relationships and strong bonds with people, and again, practicing altruism and compassion. All right, so that's the end of the episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got a lot from it. And I never thought I'd say this, but give Tubi a shot. You might actually dig what they have to offer. But in all seriousness, go check out the documentary one way or another. It is amazing. And it'll help you to increase your own personal happiness. And if you enjoyed this podcast, don't forget to hit the follow button so you won't miss future episodes. And also, if you rate and review the podcast in Apple Podcasts and Spotify, it makes a massive difference in getting the word out on the podcast. This is Your One Life. I'm Kim Young Kim. Thanks so much for listening. Hope you have a great day. I hope you have a great week. And until next time, peace.